Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. I'm Frater Eleftheria, and you might remember last year I did a video talking about Enochian magic and earlier forms of magic and mysticism that influenced the development of that particular form of magic. But in that video, I said that there was a second part of the story, not what led up to Enochian magic, but how did Enochian magic then give rise to, eventually down the track, covert government programs to contact the entities behind the UAP, or UFO phenomenon. The purpose of tonight's video is to tell you that second part of the story. And this part of the story, it's incredible. It spans more than 400 years, almost 450 years now. It covers a lot of ground, includes a lot of different names, different occult and religious organizations, and different projects by the US government mostly. But really, with all these different characters, all these different events coming in and out, it's really a story that can be summarized with one simple phrase. It is the story of the invisible college, then and now. And it's really a history of human beings' attempts to contact non-human intelligence using the technology of consciousness from our past a few hundred years ago up until the modern era. So that's the story I'm going to be telling tonight. Strap yourselves in. Fortunately, I've managed to write a lot of this down on paper because I wanted to get all the specific events and the timeline just right. So I'm going to be reading from a document I've prepared. So hopefully that'll make it a very tight, very smooth running presentation where you get a lot of information, but it's still very easy to follow. So here we go. To begin with, we need to talk about the starting point of this part of the story, which is the Enochian magic sessions of Dr. John Dee and Edward Kelley. Is it pronounced Enochian? Is it pronounced Enochian? I've pronounced it Enochian in the past because I think that makes sense when you consider Enoch and the Enochic literature. Enochian sort of makes sense. Everybody else seems to be saying Enochian, so let's just go with Enochian for now. We need to start with Enochian magic. There were a series of rituals that John Dee and Edward Kelley, the Elizabeth magicians, did to communicate with angels and gain this received wisdom, also based on some pre-existing magical systems, which became the Enochian system of magic for contacting angelic beings. If you're only now learning about Enochian magic and you want to know more about that before going on to a video like this, then go check out the earlier videos in my Enochian magic playlist. Dee and Kelley did their scrying sessions with the angels and they built up this Enochian corpus. And then they both passed away. Kelley passed away around 1598, Dee in 1608, but their work lived on. Well, several decades after Dee and Kelley had both passed, Merrick Casaubon published A True and Faithful Relation, detailing many of the scrying sessions that Dee and Kelley had undertaken. During a similar time period, Elias Ashmole acquired and preserved many priceless manuscripts detailing the Enochian workings, including the 5 books of mystery. Ashmole was an interesting figure. In addition to being an important political figure of the time, in England, he was also a Freemason and likely also a Rosicrucian, or at least sympathized with the Rosicrucian movement that was beginning to emerge at that time. And he even made some attempts to put John Dee's material into practice, the material that John Dee had written down. Vincent Bridges has hypothesized that there was a continuing esoteric tradition, perhaps even a secret society of sorts, from Dee and Kelley to Elias Ashmole, an unbroken chain of a passing down of knowledge, connected by members of Dee and Kelley's own family and a mysterious figure known as Dr. Rudd. But Francis Yates has also hypothesized that there was a continuous society of sorts from Dee and Kelley to their families through to Elias Ashmole and others. So from the initial angelic workings that Dee and Kelley did and the corpus of work that they built up as a result of those, all stemming from an encounter with an angelic being that Dee had during his lifetime, now all of that knowledge is in the custodianship of this Elias Ashmole character. Well, Ashmole, in addition to his Masonic and Rosicrucian connections, was part of an enigmatic group known as the Invisible College, which would eventually develop into the Royal Society in 1660, of course, which we all know today. A very exoteric society, but this Invisible College was a lot more esoteric in its objectives. Its purpose was to bring the great scientific minds of the age together, not only to investigate the cutting edge of materialistic science, but also the occult, alchemy, sacred geometry, metaphysics, and magic, including, it appears, the D material on how to communicate with angelic intelligences. So this knowledge continued to be passed down to people connected to the Invisible College, later the Royal Society, people connected to the family of Dr. John Dee. There was one figure known as John Byrom, who was a member of the Royal Society at the time when Isaac Newton was its president in the early 1700s. Isaac Newton, known for discovering the law of gravity, also very enthusiastic about alchemy and other mystical topics. He wrote a commentary on the Book of Revelation, for example. Also probably on the autism spectrum, no surprises there. But John Byrom was a part of this milieu in the 1700s. He was also a Freemason. He was well connected in society, and he appears to have been involved in some of the political intrigues of his day. So an involvement again with society, with politics, and with the occult. And he was very well connected to the legacy of Dee and Kelley. In fact, Byrom's family was related to Dee's family by marriage. And Byrom, together with other figures such as one Peter Smart and a mysterious Mr. Faulkner, were further involved in the copying and preserving of Dee's manuscripts, which Elias Ashmole was previously involved in. So we've got a lot of preserving and copying of Dee's writings in various forms, and these writings eventually made their way into the hands of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, an occult secret society founded in the 19th century. Now, the official story goes that the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was founded because a occultist known as William Wynne Westcott, who was involved in a number of different esoteric orders of his day, found a copy of a manuscript in a library, which would become known as the cipher manuscripts, which gave instructions for the founding of an order based around a curriculum and occult information that was sort of laid out in these manuscripts. And among the manuscripts, there was information on Enochian magic, or what would become known as Enochian magic, I should say. It's at this point that the D material starts to receive the label Enochian and gets treated as a distinct form of magic known as Enochian magic. But I digress. So the cipher manuscripts, which, so the story goes, were discovered by William Wynne Westcott, but wherever they came from, this is where the Enochian material of the Golden Dawn comes from. Now, before we go on, it is worth mentioning here that the cipher manuscripts were not the only source of the Enochian magic material which the Golden Dawn was able to access. Back in the early days of this story, of the transmission of the angelic work, Elias Ashmole eventually gave the D diaries in his possession to Hans Sloane, which then became part of the famous Sloane manuscripts that would eventually be held in the British Museum. From here, the Sloane manuscripts containing Dee's angelic magic were studied by the magician Frederick Hockley. Then he passed his knowledge down to Kenneth Mackenzie, who was a member of the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia, or SRIA. Mackenzie then passed the knowledge on to his associate and fellow SRIA member, none other than William Wynne Westcott. Thus we have another channel through which the Invisible College was able to transmit these angelic magic materials down through the centuries until it finally reached the Golden Dawn. And this is where the story gets a bit murky. There's a period of about 120 years, 150 years maybe, in between when the cipher manuscripts are discovered and some of the other characters that I previously mentioned, where it's not clear exactly how that information was transmitted to make its way to the cipher manuscripts, but one way or another, it did make its way there. Down from D and those surrounding him, down to eventually the cipher manuscripts. So anyway, as a result of all of this, the Golden Dawn is formed and begins teaching Enochian magic. And it takes some liberties in recreating the system based on the information that it does have at hand. It adds a lot of Hermetic stuff that wasn't necessarily in there before. Eventually one of Westcott's close associates, Samuel McGregor Mathers, takes over the Golden Dawn. And it is this time, during Mathers's tenure as the head of the Golden Dawn, that a new person is initiated into the order, one Aleister Crowley. And he would eventually become notorious, have a hand in politics that would eventually tear the Golden Dawn apart. But in the meantime, he learnt all he could from the Golden Dawn curriculum, including the practice of Enochian magic. Crowley fell out with the Golden Dawn eventually. The Golden Dawn dissolved, at least that form of the Golden Dawn. And Crowley went on to incorporate the Golden Dawn's practices into his own esoteric orders, the Argentium Astrum, which he founded, and the Ordo Templi Orientis, which he took over. I'll refer to these as the OTO and AA from now on. He continued the practice of Enochian magic. He went out to Algeria in 1909 and did a extensive working, scrying the 30 ethers, which eventually became the basis of the text known as The Vision and the Voice. This was an impressive feat of Enochian magic that was unparalleled at the time. So he was really starting to push this system further than anybody had done before. So Crowley was doing his thing in the 20th century, founding charters of the OTO in various places like the US and Canada to keep pushing his teachings, including the teaching of Enochian magic. In one lodge, the Agape Lodge in California, eventually this lodge would attract a new initiate known as Jack Parsons. Jack Parsons, the famous rocketeer, the founder of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, and also a dedicated occultist. So Jack Parsons, at the same time that he was making his breakthroughs in rocketry, was very active in the occult, eventually became the lodge master of the Agape Lodge. His house at the time was a large house known as the Parsonage, and he had a lot of people sort of boarding with him or living with him at the time. Lots of bohemians, artists, writers, occultists, other weirdos, all kind of hanging out in this house together with Jack Parsons as he was doing all of his magical stuff. And one of the people who at one time lived with Jack Parsons in the parsonage was the famous science fiction writer and later UFO cult leader, L. Ron Hubbard. And L. Ron Hubbard took an interest in Jack Parsons and his occult activities. Eventually, Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard would go on to do magic together. They were involved in one particular working together known as the Babalon working. Actually quite a transgressive ritual which sought to call forth the Thelemic goddess of Babylon into the world, a kind of dark feminine energy. And while this was undoubtedly a ritual with a very Thelemic flavour, its goal was to help usher in the new aeon that Crowley himself had begun to usher in. The Babalon working itself was cobbled together from lots of different things that Jack Parsons knew in terms of magic, but one of its main foundations seems to have been Enochian magic. There are a lot of different Enochian calls that were used. The Enochian tablets played some kind of a role in the ritual, probably not how they were intended to be used in an Enochian magical ritual as received by Dee and Kelley, but there were still very strong Enochian elements in this ritual that L. Ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons were doing together. It involved a lot of scrying as well, a lot of projecting of the astral body, casting the astral eyes into other dimensions in order to see what is beyond. So traditionally, when an Enochian magic ritual is performed, in which a scrying is taking place, there'll be two separate people. There'll be one person who is the scryer or the seer, who is looking into the crystal ball in order to get visions, as a focal point to get visions. And then you'll have another person who's the scribe, who's writing down everything that the seer sees. This is how Dee and Kelley did it. Dee was the scribe, Kelley was the seer. The same format was used in the Algeria workings of Crowley, where he had his visions that would become the basis of the vision and the voice. Crowley was the seer, and the unfortunate Victor Neuberg was his scribe, among other things. And then with Parsons and Hubbard, Parsons was the scribe and Hubbard was the seer. And Richard Metzger describes Hubbard's role in the Enochian rituals that formed the basis of the Babalon working in the following way. Hubbard scanned the astral plane for signs and visions. So that's what Hubbard was doing, scanning the astral plane for signs and visions according to the practice of Enochian magic. There were other things that happened in the Babalon working, but there was another highlight of the Babalon working, which was when Marjorie Cameron, who was another magical partner in this working, who appeared in the course of the working, Marjorie Cameron saw a UFO at the conclusion of the Babalon working. It's one of the earliest modern sightings of a cigar-shaped UFO, and Parsons made a note of the phenomenon, the appearance of this UFO, in his journal. So already at this early stage, we see that the use of Enochian magic is connected to the summoning of UFOs. But that's by no means the end of the story. Parsons' life was cut tragically short in 1952 when he blew himself up by dropping a vial full of mercury fulminate, or perhaps was unalived by sinister government forces, who knows. In the meantime, L. Ron Hubbard had scammed Parsons and run off to do his own thing and founded his own religion, the Church of Scientology. And it appears that many of the teachings of the Church of Scientology were directly from the OTO teachings. You've got a degree structure, which very much seems like something from the OTO. You've got a lot of the teachings of that religion seem to be based on things which Hubbard learnt from Parsons, which seem to have been also practiced by the OTO. I mean, hell, even operating Thetan, the name of the different levels sounds like OTO. It's one letter off. So there's clearly an influence here. And one of the things that Parsons shared with Hubbard, which appears to have influenced his Scientology religion, was the practice of Enochian magic, particularly the scrying element of that. There is a technique in Scientology known as exteriorization, where the Scientologist can send out their soul, or Thetan, as it's called, to travel outside of their body so that they can see or travel to remote locations in the form of the soul while their body stays exactly where it is. Exteriorization. And this is something that the Church of Scientology was teaching to people that joined. And in the 60s and 70s, there were two significant people who joined the Church of Scientology. The first of these people was Harold E. Puthoff, aka Hal Puthoff, who began exploring Scientology in the late 1960s and reached the operating Thetan level 7 in 1971. So he became very high up in the Church of Scientology in its early days. And then there was another person known as Ingo Swann who became involved in Scientology in the 1970s. These two figures, Hal Puthoff and Ingo Swann, are significant. That's because Hal Puthoff and Ingo Swann were key figures in what would become Project Stargate. This was a secret government program of the US government which was involved in remote viewing and the espionage applications of remote viewing, teaching people how to astral travel in order to obtain information for the government. And Puthoff and Swann were involved in developing protocols for this remote viewing exercise, as well as conducting the experiments. Experiments which were funded by the CIA eventually. And some of the remote viewing targets, as well as things like, I don't know, presumably a Soviet base or something like that, some of the targets of the remote viewing program, Project Stargate, were UFOs, to try and see what was behind the UFO phenomenon, or who. So we have one form of ceremonial magic designed to engage in a type of astral travel, you might say, in the form of scrying, in order to make contact with non-human intelligence. And now, with Puthoff and Swann, we again have a technique, a psionic technique, rather than an occult one, although you can say that they're basically the same thing, to accomplish the same goal of establishing some kind of a connection, or at least seeing these non-human intelligences. And one system directly inspired the other via Hubbard. And Puthoff, he's studied this subject for many decades, and he is one of the proponents of the theory, based on the research he's conducted and the stuff he's been involved in, the theory that these UAP entities are actually extra-dimensional beings, what we might have once called spiritual beings. And Puthoff is also an important figure in a group of modern scientists and luminaries who are also studying the UFO phenomenon. And what's the name of that modern group? The Invisible College. So obviously we've encountered a group called the Invisible College before in this story, and one which had a very similar mission statement, you might say, to the modern Invisible College, which begs the question, is there any relationship between these two invisible colleges? We get an answer to that question by looking at the works of another titan in the UFO world and a prominent member of this invisible college, Jacques Vallée. Now, Vallée wrote a book titled The Invisible College, What a Group of Scientists Has Discovered About UFO Influence on the Human Race. And in this book, he talks about how the term Invisible College came to be for his little group. He attributes the coining of the term to Allen Hynek, another scientist who's a part of the group. And this is a direct quote from Vallée's book regarding Allen Hynek naming the Invisible College. With his keen sense of scientific history and his usual humour, Dr. Hynek called this informal network the Invisible College, in reference to the secretive group of natural philosophers who fought against the established dogmas of the Church in the mid-17th century to acquire knowledge through experimental investigation. Inspired by early Rosicrucian ideas, they became the nucleus for the Royal Society, the first modern scientific body. This is the very same group which was traceable back to John Dee, to his immediate family and associates. The early Rosicrucian material that is referred to here that was part of the investigations of the original Invisible College includes the Enochian material left behind by Dee and Kelley. And Valet, a member of the modern Invisible College, is here acknowledging that yes, the Invisible College of today is directly inspired by that earlier Invisible College. It's really like a revival of the very same concept, the very same type of organization. Now, it's unclear whether the members of this modern day Invisible College are aware of their direct link back to John Dee and Edward Kelley in the way that it is laid out in this video, with all the facts and all the connections laid out in this video, and whether they are aware of the connection between the techniques that some of their members use to communicate with non-human intelligence and the techniques of Dee and Kelley. However, it is clear, it's certain, that the modern Invisible College are aware in the broadest possible terms that their work is a continuation of the original Invisible College, which is linked to the work of Dee and Kelley. And among this modern Invisible College, there is at least some awareness of the significance of Enochian magic itself. In the book that I just mentioned, on the Invisible College, Valet mentions Dee and Kelley's communications with angels and compares them to modern UFO and NHI contact experiences. So that's all very intriguing. Now, back to the member of the Invisible College that is our focus at the moment, Hal Puthoff. What else has Puthoff done in the UFO space to be such a significant member of this Invisible College? Well, he's also a big player in some of the major UFO programs that have existed over the years. He was a part of ORSAP, which not only researched UFOs, but also Skinwalker Ranch. He co-founded the To the Stars Academy, together with Tom DeLonge from Blink-182. Tom DeLonge is also a Freemason, so the connections to the world of the occult and this stuff continue even to the present day. Puthoff appeared in the recent Age of Disclosure documentary that was released last year, and he has also contributed to the discussion on the consciousness aspect of UAP. And Project Stargate was his crowning achievement, or at least one of them. And Project Stargate still serves as an inspiration for people trying to establish contact with NHIs telepathically, and is likely also form the basis of later UFO programs, including programs using consciousness or mental abilities in order to have some kind of an interaction with non-human intelligences. One person who comes to mind who can shed light on the contemporary situation and how it might have evolved from Project Stargate is Jake Barber. Jake Barber is a UFO whistleblower from the US government, was a helicopter pilot at one stage, and worked in this capacity on top secret programs to retrieve crashed UFOs. Barber recounts how he would feel a psychic connection to the craft when he approached them, even a sense of telepathic communication with them. He also talks about how the military were using what he terms psionics, which is really psychic powers, another term for that. They were using psionics to call these craft down. And recently in this disclosure space, there's been a lot of chatter about how members of the intelligence community have techniques of their own for mentally contacting the entities who are the controllers of UFOs or UAP. Well, you could say that the research into the military applications of psi ability in this way, using psionics to have an interaction with NHIs, really began with Project Stargate. That was really the first remote viewing program that the government put together, the US government. This same Jake Barber that I just mentioned is today a proponent of human-initiated contact using visualization and telepathy to summon UFOs. This is very similar to the CE5 protocol of Dr. Stephen Greer. So really nothing new is under the sun. What began as Enochian magic and occult techniques to contact non-human intelligence has become more scientific or psionic based programs to contact non-human intelligence, which appears, at least in my opinion, to be in fact the same non-human intelligence, the same phenomenon, just wearing different masks. And I can confirm from my own investigations, my own fact-finding mission over the last year, as well as reflecting on my own experiences, that Enochian magic can be used to summon beings that fit the description of the light orb category of UAP. This fact-finding mission of mine is a work in progress. I've come across some case studies already. I may come across even more, but it's a work in progress. But I've researched this topic enough now to be satisfied that there is definitely a connection, quite a strong connection, between Enochian magic and the modern UAP psionic kind of programs that have been developed by the US government. And I've tried to demonstrate tonight exactly how that connection flows across time. And now in the present day, we're living in the age of disclosure. We're seeing the beginnings of official UFO or UAP disclosure from the US government, and more of this information seeing the light of day as people turn their attention toward the issue. And in recent times, the disclosure community has noted that there seems to be a shift away from the old nuts and bolts explanation of the UFO phenomenon towards a more spiritual or consciousness-based approach, traditionally disparagingly described as woo. And this more spiritual approach is applied both to explaining the phenomenon and in coming up with ways of establishing contact with the phenomenon. But what I hope I've demonstrated tonight is that this spiritual consciousness-based approach has always been an important feature of government UAP programs from the beginning. In fact, our attempts to establish communication with non-human intelligences can be traced back hundreds or even thousands of years through the world's spiritual traditions, through spiritual techniques for establishing contact. And so the scientific approach to the phenomenon is really the new kid on the block, not the other way around. And I believe that as we attempt to grasp the nature of the phenomenon more and more, the mystical traditions of the past can serve as a largely untapped, as yet, wellspring of knowledge of the phenomenon itself, and can supply us with wisdom from the ages regarding how we can deal with it. So that's it. That is the story of the Invisible College then and now. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe to my channel to support my work, hit the notification bell, leave any comments you have below. If you want to support me further, hit join or thanks or buy some merch. I'm not wearing my own merch tonight. This is actually merch from Invisible Frontiers, the YouTube channel and Substack of Matthew Brown, another UAP whistleblower who I've got to know over the past few months. He's been doing some really great work in the disclosure space with his own whistleblowing activities, and is continuing to contribute to the disclosure discussion with his YouTube channel and with his Substack. So go support him by buying some of his merch. But thank you again for listening to this video, and I'll see you next time.